A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Appoint us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to appoint, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way.
There are times in our lives when we look at the world and we simply cannot help but shake our heads in disbelief at what we are seeing. Think for a moment about a time when you witnessed something so unlikely or unexpected or even outrageous that caused you to say, "I seriously can't believe what I'm seeing," or "You can't make this stuff up," or "What the what? You can't be serious?" It's like the woman who went to the shop to pick up her car, and the guy at the counter said to her, "Your car's ready, but there's a small problem. We've accidentally locked the keys inside of it." And so she went out to the car and found the mechanic using one of those Slim Jims in the window, trying to pull up the lock from the outside. And while he was struggling to find the lock, she happened to walk over to the other side of the car, and on a whim she pulled the door handle, and sure enough, the door opened. And she said to the mechanic, "Hey, it's unlocked over here." And the mechanic said, "Yeah, I know, I already got that side." And sometimes you look at the world and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do you ever find yourself just shaking your head in disbelief at the strange comedy of the world and the utter tragedy of it? At the ache of it and the awe of it, at the wonders of the world and the horrors of it too? And not just the world, but our own lives. And the great paradox of faith is that we assume that if only we could see it all more clearly and see how it all fits somehow together, maybe we could come to believe in God so completely, so perfectly, that we might someday stop shaking our heads in disbelief at things. And maybe everything would finally make perfect sense. We wouldn't have to live with all the ambiguity and all the questions about the world, about our lives, why our lives are sometimes as messy as they are, and why the world is as dark as it often is. Only it doesn't seem to work that way. For even the most devoted follower of Christ, there are still moments when, because of what we have seen and experienced, it can be very difficult to believe. I'm now talking about the very hard stuff, the dark stuff that we endure, the senseless tragedies, the needless suffering, the disappointments and betrayals, the abuses and violence, all the stuff that defies reason and logic, the stuff that seems to have no place in any so-called divine plan that any loving God would ever call good. And what do we do with all that stuff? And so much of Americanized Christianity doesn't really know what to do with that stuff. except maybe to hide it or fix it or even disguise it. America's favorite smiley face TV preacher from Houston might tell us to just think positive thoughts about these things and our lives will somehow get better. And maybe a lot of mega church preachers these days would say, just give it over to God and suffer through this life and trust that life in the next world will be better. And of course, there's a whole posse of prosperity preachers who might say that if only you would believe more and pray more, and especially if only you would give a lot more, maybe your fortunes would turn and your blessings would flow and you wouldn't have so many problems. And Christianity has always struggled with reconciling the good stuff with the hard stuff of life. Maybe that's because the problem with faith is that it will give you what you want, but it will also give you what you didn't expect. If what you want is love and grace and forgiveness and joy and beauty and transcendence, faith will give you that. And this is what we all want, isn't it? But then Jesus shows us with his own life that faith will lead you into experiences you did not expect or you cannot understand or cannot even control. Because when you really find the things you want, and when you really live for these things, you will end up suffering for them. And you'll give some things up for them, and you'll grieve for them, and you'll endure darkness and loss and hard times for them. Christianity has always struggled to reconcile this paradox, and it's on full display in our passage from Mark's Gospel today, and in these two very contrasting images. The first is of these two disciples, James and John, who come to Jesus with this rather peculiar and bold request. Teacher, they say, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. They want what they think faith can give them. But they soon see that faith will also give them what they did not expect. And Jesus asks them, well, what do you want me to do for you? And they say, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. In other words, what they're asking for are two high-level cabinet positions when Jesus assumes the throne of Israel. They are so intoxicated by the illusion of glory and of power that they are blind to the reality of the suffering that awaits Jesus in Jerusalem. This is ironic because just moments before their absurd request, Jesus had actually told them for the third time that they were all going to Jerusalem and that when he arrived with them, he would be condemned and mocked and flogged and killed. And what are the next words out of their mouths? Jesus, when you take the throne in Jerusalem, we'd like to be your numbers 2 and 3. Faith will give you what you want, but it will also give you what you do not expect. Maybe James and John are not much different than you and me. We all suffer from selective blindness. It's not that we don't know the truth sometimes. It's just that we prefer not to think about it and see it. Denial is the most powerful force in our lives. I remember one of my favorite seminary professors who had this mass in his stomach that had been growing for several months. He felt miserable the entire time. He could see it, he could actually feel it, but he couldn't bring himself to consciously acknowledge that he might actually have a tumor, that maybe he should get checked out. And months went by, he did nothing, until the symptoms finally became unbearable, and he could no longer teach. And when the surgeon removed that tumor, it weighed over 4 pounds. And do you know what was really ironic about that? He was my pastoral care and counseling professor. Denial, selective blindness, It's one of the greatest powers in the world. And so maybe we want to ask ourselves, are there parts of our lives that we're not paying attention to, or that we are afraid to see? Are there areas of our lives, our relationships, our parts of our communities that we're choosing consciously or unconsciously to simply not see? And we contrast that story of James and John with this character named Bartimaeus. At some point in his life, Bartimaeus had lost his eyesight. And on this particular day in the story, knowing that Jesus had come to town, Bartimaeus intends to get his eyesight back. No more living in darkness. Bartimaeus wants to see the world again, the beauty of it, but also the brokenness of it. It doesn't matter. He wants to see it all again. And so from his curbside, he says, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus asks Bartimaeus the same question he asks James and John previously. What do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus says, "My teacher, I want to see again." And I think it's that little word, again, that makes Bartimaeus one of the bravest characters in all the New Testament. Bartimaeus knows what the world looks like already. He'd seen it before. He hadn't always been blind. Bartimaeus knows that there is beauty out there in the world, but he also knows there's plenty of ugliness too. It's not all good. There's quite enough in the world that no one would ever want to see again, and yet Bartimaeus still wants to see everything again. He wants to see it all. And here's why I think his story is not just a story about real eyesight, but it's a story about faith. Faith as real, honest vision. Faith as the vision to see what it is you really want, but also the vision to see what it is you don't expect. Because remember, faith will give you what you want, but it will also always give you what you don't expect. And Bartimaeus, having already seen the world once, is asking Jesus for that kind of vision. I want to see again. I want to see everything. And if seeing again means seeing the beauty of life and the mess of life, all of it, then I'm in. I want to see what faith promises to give me. And even what I do not expect it will bring. Sometimes when faith brings us what we don't expect, we get so disillusioned we lose our faith. Or we prefer to just stay in the darkness and close ourselves off to new opportunities and new discoveries and new adventures with God. I've mentioned before how years ago, Lori, my wife, and I went to Disneyland, and we were riding a Space Mountain when halfway through the ride, the cars came to this abrupt and unexpected stop. We waited for minutes and minutes in the darkness, and people started grumbling, and kids were getting super antsy, and then this voice came over the loudspeaker announcing that a malfunction had happened, and we were informed that the lights would soon be coming on, and that we would have to step off the ride and take the catwalk along the tracks to the emergency exit. And then, soon enough, the lights came on, and our whole perception of the happiest place on earth suddenly changed. The bright lights revealed the real world that you never see behind the illusion of darkness and deep space. This ordinary world of concrete and steel and thousands of pounds of chewed bubblegum and orphan sunglasses and baseball caps and all these thousands of lonely Mickey Mouse ears. You never see that mess when the lights are off. It was the sudden loss of illusion. It was real life, messy life. Maybe that's why I love Bartimaeus. He wants to see everything with the lights on. I want to see again, he says. And the healing comes to Bartimaeus not by anything that Jesus even does for him. The healing comes to him just in the asking. And so Jesus says, your faith has made you well. No abracadabra, no miraculous interventionist divine intrusion. It happens just like that old song says. I was blind, but now I see. I think that's the way it works most of the time. When you're willing to see all of it, when you're willing to stop denying the dark, the messy parts, the hard parts, the hidden parts, that's when the healing starts to happen in our life and in the world. We don't know anything else about Bartimaeus except that when he followed Jesus into Jerusalem, he went all the way, which meant that if faith gives us what we want, it also gives us what we do not expect. And Bartimaeus was at least prepared then for it. Because he wanted to see again, he wouldn't be surprised that the world could be both beautiful and ugly all at once. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not that he got his eyesight back. Maybe the real miracle was that he followed Jesus all the way to Jesus' death. I think the truth of it all is that most of us are somewhere between James and John on the one hand and Bartimaeus on the other. We want what faith can give, but when faith gives us what we don't expect, it's sometimes hard to make sense of it. And so we pray for vision to see differently. Marcus Borg, in his book, The Heart of Christianity, once wrote that faith is more than assenting to a set of beliefs, and it's more than trusting in God when you can't see the way ahead. It is even more than obedience to the rules of God. Faith is all of these things, says Borg, but it's even something more. It's also vision. It's a way of seeing. It's a way of seeing the whole. Seeing what really is in our lives and in the world. And still believing that despite the threatening realities of life, God is generous. And that kind of belief leads to the ability to love and be present in the moment. It generates a willingness to spend and to be spent for the sake of a vision that goes beyond ourselves. Teacher, let me see again. And isn't that the point of faith? To really see and love everything. The whole world, the whole of our lives, the totality of others as they really are, of everything as it really is, and to love it all without exception as God loves it. That's the cure of our selective blindness that only wants to see the good stuff, that chooses to lose sight of things sometimes that maybe are just too hard to look at. Teacher, let me see again. Make that your prayer this week. Join Bartimaeus on his curbside, crying out, my teacher, let me see again, because we all lose sight of some things sometimes, a lot of things actually. It's often a conscious choice. There are parts of the world and parts of our life, parts of our lives that are not as beautiful as we prefer. And Jesus shows up every day of our lives asking, what do you want me to do for you? And anyone who has ever seen the world and life, and especially their own lives, as they really are, and still chooses to say, let me see again, will usually hear the same words that Bartimaeus heard too. Your faith has made you well. Our takeaways for today: faith will give us what we want, but it will also give us what we didn't expect. Faith is believing that despite the threatening realities of life, God is generous. And only when we see the whole can the healing begin.